As the summer weather arrives here in London, we're going to be taking a look back at Sir Keir Starmer's recent indoor campaign launch in Thurrock. At the heart of it was a campaign pledge card with 6 different promises on it. It all had a ring of Tony Blair's New Labour pledge card back in 1997. So was he being a copycat Tony Blair? I put that question to him.
Ben, from the Telegraph.
Hi, Ben Riley-Smith from the Telegraph. Tony Blair had 5 pledges on his card. You have 6 today. Tony Blair had New Labour. You've got Change Labour. Tony Blair used to take his tie off at big events. I've spotted you don't have a tie on today.
Is there anything else you spotted, Ben?
Well, what do you say to people who claim that you're just a copycat Blair?
Well, look, the first thing I'd say about Tony Blair, which is more important than whether he took his tie off, is he won 3 elections in a row. Ever since I've been leader of the Labour Party, everybody's been trying to sort of say, well, which leader are you most like? You know, who have you secretly got tattooed on the inside of your arm? And the answer is none of them. Because this team and I, all of our candidates and I, we have to face the future. We are trying to create the conditions for the 4th time in the history of the Labour Party that we've come from opposition into power. So yes, some of the things that are important about winning power are the same, of course they are. But I'm very conscious that we're facing the challenges that are now here in 2024 and have to provide answers to those challenges. Thank you, Ben.
So I've got a few laughs in the room, but it is worth taking a look, I think, at how there are a lot of similarities between Keir Starmer's project and Tony Blair. The first one's really captured in that pledge card concept. So take yourself back to 97, there'd been a long period of Tory rule. Labour under Tony Blair were desperate to get back into power, and they were trying to work out how to communicate their messages simply, succinctly to the public. And they came up with this idea of a pledge card, which was distill your core messages into 5 short sentences, put them on a card that is so small you could keep in your wallet. And that way it was both distilling down what your core message was to the country, but also hopefully making it palatable and easy to remember for voters. To be fair, he's not the first Labour leader to come up with the copycat concept. Ed Miliband did it. In fact, they wrote them on stone, if you remember, with the Ed Stone.
These 6 pledges are now carved in stone.
That backfired as a format, but the idea is the same. In simple terms, list what your policy priorities are. But beyond that, actually the styles of campaigning between Keir Starmer and Tony Blair are quite similar. I made a joke about it in my question, but Keir Starmer's tie was off, his sleeves were rolled up, but there was famous mandates in the New Labour years to try and get people to take their tie off, for the simple reason that they were trying to make them more approachable, more modern in the eyes of the electorate. Now, Keir Starmer may not be as good an orator as Tony Blair, but he seems to want to project that idea that he's not a stuffy man in an ivory tower in a suit, but is more relatable to voters.
Here we are. 1 card, 6 steps. In your hand, a plan to change the country.
But it's not just the style of campaigning that's similar, but the policy drives. At the heart of both these projects is essentially reassurance. They were both sending a message to Tory voters, to Tory waverers, that it's safe to cross the aisle and vote for Labour after a long period of not doing so.
Smaller classes, tough on crime, shorter waiting lists, more jobs for young people, an economy run efficiently for the many, not the few. Now that is our pledge today.
And actually, if you zoom in on the words of the pledge card on Sir Keir Starmer's version, you can see evidence of that. So take a look at the first promise, the economic message. All of the phrases in there are about reassurance, not dramatic change. So it talks about stabilising the economy. It talks about keeping taxes and inflation and mortgages low. And it actually talks about spending restraint. So this isn't a Labour Party going into the election promising a huge spending bonanza, a big increase in public service spending. They're actually projecting the message that every penny of taxpayers' money will be carefully spent. And that's quite similar to what Tony Blair and Gordon Brown did in the run-up to 97. They actually matched the Tory spending plans for the first 2 years in government. So they were deliberately trying to take the issue of tax and spend off the table. And then take another pledge, the crime promise on the pledge card. Think of all the different crimes you could zoom in on if you're a campaigner. What the Labour have decided to do is actually zoom in on antisocial behaviour. Why? Well, their argument is that what really frustrates a lot of people in the country when they look about their communities and there's a lot of low-level crime that is going unpunished, burglaries in particular. And obviously, if you remember your New Labour history, ASBOs were a Tony Blair invention, antisocial behaviour orders, zooming in on exactly the same issue, that people were frustrated with smaller crimes and people getting away with them, rather than the most heinous crimes.
People, particularly elderly or vulnerable people, the single biggest problem they have is antisocial behaviour.
So then step back and look at the big picture. Everybody knows Tony Blair's project, not of Labour, but as New Labour, this new concept that was different from the left-wing Labour of the past and the Tories. Increasingly, you may notice that Keir Starmer is doing something similar. He is talking about changed Labour.
The big change, the change that we want to bring about. We've changed the Labour Party. These are the first shoots of the change that you deserve to see.
Now, we haven't seen it with a capital C changed Labour like we have a capital N New Labour yet, but the exact same idea sits behind it, which is they are trying to communicate to the public, look, we are different to what's gone before. For Starmer, it is Jeremy Corbyn's Labour leadership. For Blair, it was the years in the 80s when Thatcher kept winning. But it's not just similarities. Actually, Tony Blair and Keir Starmer are talking quite a bit together in various different ways. My understanding is Starmer does seek advice from Tony Blair, especially on the realities of what it's like to step into government after so long in opposition. They also appeared on stage together a couple of months ago. That's interesting because so many Labour leaders recently have actually been rejecting the New Labour legacy. Ed Miliband and particularly Jeremy Corbyn didn't want to own and promote the achievements in government, but Keir Starmer really does want to do that.
With these first steps, we can rebuild our country with Labour.
And actually it goes further than that. The Tony Blair Institute has a lot of members of staff who are liaising with shadow cabinet ministers, and if Keir Starmer does pass into government, then we're expecting quite a lot of those staff members to form part of his government as well. Despite the similarities, I don't want you to think that they are identical politicians who will approach power the same. In fact, there are at least three real big differences that you need to bear in mind between these two men. Firstly, their route to politics. Tony Blair, yes, he was a lawyer, but he got into politics pretty early. He spent years and years and years in opposition with Gordon Brown, understanding the parliamentary system and trying to plot their way into power. Keir Starmer was into his 50s before he came to Parliament. His entire life, his centre of gravity, his friendship, his career is away from this place. So I do think that means he takes a different approach to politics, possibly has less of the baggage of the Labour Party that Tony Blair was trying to countenance. Secondly, the conditions for moving into government. Look at the inheritance Labour will get if they take over from the Tories, not least economic growth. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown were lucky because the economy was beginning to grow and soar when they took over in '97. That meant fundamentally they had an easier job of managing the economy. Also, they had the proceeds of growth. They had a lot of money to be able to spend on public services. Keir Starmer will not have that inheritance. There may be some growth, but fundamentally the economy has been bumping along between 0 and 1% for quite a while now. And also public services are strained, seriously strained. In fact, there's a huge black hole in both parties' public finances when you talk about the scale of the cuts that need to come after the election and how honest they are about how they'll fund them. So there's no idea that Keir Starmer is going to step into government and it's going to be sweetness and light. And finally, just a point about wider politics in Britain. There is a deep disillusionment with the entire political class among British voters. That wasn't quite the same in '97. When you talk to people who were in those administrations, in those teams, they talk about a genuine feeling of hope, of optimism, of excitement. You can see that in the polls. You can see that in Tony Blair's "A New Dawn has broken, has it not?" speech when he won on election night.
We always said that if we had the courage to change, then we could do it.
There was this big feeling that New Labour could change the country. Now, 20, 25 years on, there's a deep disillusionment with the political class. Perhaps it was partly expenses, perhaps it was globalisation and jobs moving abroad. But there is a feeling among voters that yes, they're fed up with the Tories, but that possibly Labour aren't going to radically be able to change the country either. So it's those low expectations that Keir Starmer is somehow trying to meet. So you'll notice in some of his messaging and photographs, he looks quite sober and serious. He's not gleeful and celebratory. So for those reasons, despite all the similarities between Keir Starmer and Tony Blair, I wouldn't expect a 1997 moment after the election.
We say tonight You, the British people, have given us the chance to serve you. You have put your trust in us, and we say to you, we shall repay that trust for you. We govern for you.
Order! Westminster Source is a political video series from the Daily Telegraph taking you behind the scenes of Westminster. If you want to see the latest political news, please do check out our website and app. And if there's a topic you'd like us to cover, please put it in the comments below.